Hi, I'm Kent Mueller, and I've been baking communion bread for decades, originally with whole wheat recipes. However, during the pandemic lockdown, I made it a goal of mine to create a gluten-free, good-tasting, easy-to-make bread with a good texture. And so I'd like to walk you through that today. That just reminded me that the oven is being preheated, and you'll want to do that yourself to 350. You will find that I have a recipe that is available at kentmueller.com. We start with a 2-cup glass measuring cup, and we're going to be adding ingredients to it, so you need to have the measurements and be able to see it. We start with 1/2 cup of quick oats. We don't want too many chunks in there. And we also add to that 1 tablespoon of ground chia, which creates sort of a gel-like binder. And we want to mix these together pretty well because at times the chia will clump together and we don't want big chunks of chia at the end of the bread. We add to this enough water to make exactly about 8 ounces. It's very warm water, not too hot, and we'll be mixing this together, again making sure that all of the clumps are broken up. We then set this aside for about 10 minutes. While our oat mixture is hydrating, we'll be mixing some dry ingredients together. We start out with gluten-free baking flour. There are some types of gluten-free baking mix that include salt, sodium, and some kind of leavening, baking powder, sodium bicarbonate. If you read the label on the back, and there's little or no sodium, you probably know that it's gluten-free flour. This one has 15 milligrams of sodium, 1%. That doesn't count. If indeed you're using baking flour such as this, we'll be adding salt and baking powder to it. If you have some kind of baking mix that has those in it, don't add those in again. You need to pay careful attention to making sure that those aren't in there twice. Now, many types of gluten-free flour come in a package much larger than 1 pound. If that's the case, I would encourage you strongly to use a scale in order to measure out 1 pound. I've done a little experimenting, and there's a wide range of densities of gluten-free flour. And in order to get the best texture, we want to be as close to 1 pound as possible. In this case, I found at Kroger and Colorado King Soopers, Simple Truth brand of an all-purpose flour mix. It says flour mix, but there is no sodium or baking powder in here. And it comes in a 1 pound package. So that makes it easy, if indeed you can find a 1 pound package. And to that, we are adding 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and we are adding 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And we simply want to mix all of these together very well. I'm about 8 minutes into the 10-minute hydration of the oatmeal and chia, but I can already get started here to add some ingredients. Next, 1/3 cup of some type of oil. I really enjoy using sunflower oil, knowing that the brightness of the cheery sunflowers is a part of the communion bread. And so, going to add in 1/3 cup of oil to the line. To that, 1/3 additional cup of molasses. for beautiful color and flavor. And 1/3 cup of honey right to the 2-cup line. And we will now mix this together. We now mix our wet and our dry ingredients together. I find using a spatula works particularly well. We are aiming for a texture that is very much like a fairly soft Play-Doh. Depending on your gluten-free flour, depending on the humidity, depending on your measurements, you may have to add a bit more flour. Okay, it doesn't have to be quite all incorporated, but we'll be working this with our hands in just a moment. I've just washed my hands and I've put out a pastry mat. We're not using these markings for any purpose, so just a countertop or a piece of parchment paper, anything could work. But let's get this out on the counter, and we'll be kneading it just for the purpose of making sure everything is blended together and so that we don't have to add any more flour. So we're not really kneading it in the manner that you would knead regular bread. We're simply making sure we're getting it together and finding that there are no big cracks in it. As you can see, the ratio of the liquid to dry ingredients seems about exactly right today with the correct 1 pound amount of gluten-free flour. Okay, we're going to make that into one nice round of dough, and we will be dividing it up here. I find that a bench scraper works really well, and we're going to be dividing this into 6 pieces, similar to a pie. So we go once down the center, and then we eyeball a third and a third. Won't necessarily be exact, but I want to be about a third in here, and a third in here. And we now roll these into nice rounds. I'm rolling my last wedge into a ball. Main thing is we want to make sure that there are not a lot of significant cracks. I now have my baking pans, and I have cut parchment paper to the right size, folded it over here, and I will place 3 of these on this baking sheet. And the next thing we do is flatten these. I found the easiest thing to do is to get maybe at Goodwill or the ARC store a glass plate, and I have created a circle round on a piece of parchment paper, 5.5 inches across. The ink side have facing upwards, and we're going to be able to see when we're at about 5.5 inches. Bigger is better than smaller. I smooth the edges just a bit. You see, this one was a little higher on this side, so No, it's just a little more. Next, I'm going to score very lightly across the top of each one. Not too deep. If you go too deep, it will break apart too easily when they're picked up. Now we're going to do exactly the same thing with our next sheet of dough. We place the 2 sheets in the 350 degree oven and we bake them 9, 10, 11 minutes, depending on your oven. Most importantly, we don't want them underbaked, nor do we want them overbaked. They should be right in the middle so they still have a soft texture, but are not doughy inside. Well, the bread's out of the oven. Let's see how the texture is. We'll open this one up. And you can see it kind of falls apart where the crease is there as expected. What I'd like to see is how many pieces that we might get out of a round. 48, 49, 50. So those are 50 pieces that are pretty consistent. Not a lot of crumbs, a few. That's to be expected. Hope you enjoyed this and that gluten-free bread in your worshiping community might be a new way to extend hospitality and invitation to the table.